Time Zone and good afternoon. Good morning, everyone in the Central Time Zone, and good afternoon to everyone in Eastern. My name is Laura Bond, and I'm today's moderator. Welcome to today's webinar, What's Coming Down from Washington, Federal Budget Shifts and State Impacts. It's hosted by CSG South SEL program. I currently serve as Vice Chair of the SEL Committee. I work for the Tennessee Comptroller of the Treasury Office. I've been here for about 16 years, and I've worked in various roles, and I'm happy to be your host today. This webinar is going to explore how federal budgets and policy shifts could affect state level responsibilities for 2026. A few housekeeping rules. This session is being recorded. We are saving some time for questions at the end, so be sure and submit some questions through the Q&A or chat that you would like our panelists to address. And a short survey link will be shared at the end, and please take time to fill that out. We've got a couple of panelists with us today. We have got Miss Sophie Quinton. She's reporting on budgets, taxes, and economic policy for Pluribus News State Affairs. Ms. Quinton draws on experience with State Line and the National Journal. Her work spans federal, state, and local policy, providing analyst and context on emerging fiscal and policy trends. She covers complex economic issues in ways that inform decision-making and support understanding across state and local governments. She's also a graduate of Yale University. Thank you for being here, Sophie. And we also have Catherine Vesey-White. She works as a Director of Budget Process Studies at NASPO, which is the National Association of State Budget Officers. Catherine evaluates state budgeting practices through key publications and the Fiscal Survey of States. She tracks trends across education and workforce sectors. She analyzes how states use data to guide fiscal planning and provides insight into evolving state strategies for managing budgets and resources. And finally, we have Dr. Larry Ashe serving as our third panelist. Dr. Ashe is an economist with a doctorate from UNC Chapel Hill. He has more than 3 decades of experience in business, government, and academia. He's held senior roles in energy companies, served in Congress and the Federal Energy Regulation Commission. He taught economics at UNC and the University of Maryland. Dr. Ashe spans policy analysis, fiscal management, and strategic planning, and he has contributed to community development in his local Arkansas community. Thank you again for all of our panelists being here and for everyone joining us. I think we're going to get started. To begin, we're going to have a presentation from Catherine. She's got a slideshow prepared for us that talks about NASPO's and the Fiscal Survey of States.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Laura. Just confirming that you all see the slide deck.
We can see it, but it's not in presenter mode.
All right, I'm gonna hit that now. Okay, all set?
All set, it looks great.
All right, thank you so much. So I'm just gonna kick things off with a brief overview of state fiscal conditions to help set the stage for today's discussion based largely on the recently released NASPO Fiscal Fall 2025 Fiscal Survey of States data. And I'll briefly touch on some of the federal impacts on states as well. So I'll just jump right in. So based on what we are seeing in the data NASPO's collected, as well as hearing directly from states, state general fund revenues are projected to see another year of slower growth in fiscal year 2026, which is leading states to really have to manage expectations in an increasingly tighter fiscal environment. We are also hearing from a growing number of states that spending demands are outpacing revenue growth, especially as you look into the out years. So states are taking steps now to ensure that they can maintain structurally balanced budgets into the future. Some key spending pressures for states include in healthcare, you have, high medical inflation. A number of states are wrestling with the budget impacts of school choice initiatives. There's housing initiatives in a number of states to address affordability concerns. Disasters are becoming costlier. And of course, one of the main topics of today's conversation, declining federal funds and the pressure that is putting on states as well. And these declines in federal funds not only include things like the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act on states that we will be talking about in a bit, but also the already scheduled end to pandemic era federal funds, as well as recent cancellations of federal grants through executive actions and whatnot. So I'm going to just briefly review some data just to highlight where states stand in terms of their own general fund fiscal conditions, as that is, a key part to this discussion. So states' general fund revenues, as I noted, are expected to see another year of slow growth, in fact, almost flat growth in this current fiscal year based on our most recently collected data. And this follows several consecutive years of slow revenue growth, especially when looked at on a median basis for states. And that, of course, followed to the two fastest growing years on record for general fund revenue. So it's really been an interesting time these last 6 or so years in terms of state revenue trends. And it's been a little bit, and these fluctuations have been, have had a lot of impact on state budgets. In line with these national growth trends, you can see in the 3 most recent years that most states have been experiencing revenue growth below 5% for the past 3 fiscal years, including the one we are currently in based on estimates. And you can see in FY26, 20 states actually expect general fund revenue to record a slight decline or stay flat in the current fiscal year. Now, because this is a CSG South webinar, wanted to also give a view of what these trends look like just for the South region. And you can see it's a very similar breakdown to the national picture. In addition to a variety of economic factors at play in terms of, that are driving this slower revenue growth, things like slower inflation, slower economic growth, state tax policy changes in recent years have also contributed to the slower growth rates that states have experienced. And this is just a picture of that. You can see that the scale of tax reductions in the states has slowed down after the widespread tax cuts that we saw in FY23 and FY24. Besides looking at annual revenue growth, we also like to look at how state revenue collections perform compared to states' own revenue forecasts when they set their budgets, especially since those forecasts generally incorporate variables like tax policy changes in their estimates. And you can see here that revenue growth, that despite revenue growth having slowed beginning in FY23, as I just pointed out, most states have continued to see their collections beat original estimates year after year. So states, in other words, did predict that revenue slowdown and they budgeted for it accordingly. This is why, despite slow revenue growth in recent years, we haven't been hearing about states making mid-year budget reductions for the most part. In fact, states have generally increased spending in the middle of their fiscal year because revenues have continued for most states to beat their original estimates. But for the current fiscal year that we are in now, FY26, revenue performance based on early data collected in the fiscal year indicate a little more of a mixed performance relative to projections. Moving over to the spending side of the equation, Here you can see, similar to the revenue chart, what general fund spending has looked like in recent years in terms of year-over-year growth. In a little bit of a contrast to the revenue side, where we saw really significant increases for a couple of years and then slow growth, you see on the spending side, the spending growth has been a little bit more spread out. And this is really in part a reflection of states continuing to spend down their prior year revenue surpluses that they accumulated over multiple years. But you see there for FY 2026, based on enacted budgets, states on a median basis are expecting near flat spending growth compared to last year. Accordingly, you can see here, these are the growth rates ranges broken down by the number of states in these different growth categories. And you can see there's a little bit more of a mix across of, while most states are expecting general fund spending to grow below 5%, and in fact, almost half are expecting general fund spending that declines, at least based on compared to what they actually spent in FY 2025. You still see some states recording larger expenditure increases, but this is, again, likely due, at least in part, to states spending down prior year surplus funds and continuing to do that. Once again, wanted to show you that breakdown just for the South region. And again, you see a similar story to the national picture when just looking at the southern states. Mm-hmm. One clear signal that we saw from the recent fiscal survey report is that states did report a greater use of budget management strategies, things like targeted spending cuts, hiring freezes or eliminating vacant positions, revenue increases, Medicaid program changes. All of these saw greater use in their enacted budgets for FY 26 as compared to a year ago, what they reported in the fall 2024 report, which does signify a tightening fiscal environment for states. Along similar lines, we also saw fewer states report across the board pay increases for state employees in FY 2026 compared to the last several years. I'm now going to turn to, we've talked a lot about tightening and not necessarily the most happy news, but one bright spot in state fiscal conditions is rainy day fund trends. So you can see here that state rainy day fund levels remain at near all-time highs after experiencing significant growth from FY 2021 to FY 2023. Since that time, despite slower revenue growth, most states continue to increase or maintain the size of their rainy day funds, despite the slower revenue growth environment that they have been experiencing. And here, broken down by the number of states, you can see almost all states have hold a rainy day fund balance of at least 5% as a percentage of general fund spending. And just looking at the South, you can see all states in the region have a rainy day fund balance greater than 5% as a percentage of their general fund spending. And keep in mind, too, this is just rainy day fund levels. States also, a number of states hold historically large balances in their ending balances as well, as they have not yet as they still hold some of those revenue surpluses from prior years in those balances. So I am going to just fly through these last couple of slides because I know we're going to get into all of this a lot more during the rest of the hour. But just wanted to briefly introduce some of the provisions in The One Big Beautiful Bill Act that affects state budgets that NASWA is monitoring most closely. Certainly, the changes to the federal tax code are expected to reduce revenues in a majority of states, some significantly and very much depending on how states conform to those. And then, and those, most importantly, those happen more immediately as opposed to on the spending side, the provisions in the law are, especially those related to Medicaid and SNAP, that have important state budget impacts, will be phased in over time and in the years to come. And again, I'm not going to go into these in depth here. We'll get into this all more during discussion, but just wanted to highlight some key points that NASBO would make with respect to the impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act on state budgets, including that, as just reviewed in this presentation, state fiscal conditions are already tight even before these impacts take effect, and also are not happening overnight. They will occur and be phased in over multiple years. And they also will not be uniform or hit all states in the same way, nor will states respond in the same way to these changes. So a lot more to come and follow as we track this. Finally, just wanted to highlight there are some resources on our website, including the Fiscal Survey of States is available that this data comes from, as well as our state expenditure report, which will be updated for 2025 very shortly, and our budget processes in the states report. And just a quick plug for our weekly e-publications, which anyone can subscribe to as well on our website. So with that, I will turn it back over to Laura, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. We appreciate all the slides that had a lot of important information. Especially, I enjoyed hearing about the rainy day fund. I know in Tennessee, we're really proud of our rainy day fund. So I'm glad to see that other states have that as one of their priorities as well. Now we're going to shift over to Sophie. Sophie, federal budget and policy changes can create uncertainty for states. Could you please start us off by summarizing what you see as the biggest fiscal trends or policy shifts that states should be aware of heading into 2026?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for the question and thanks for having me on the panel. I think that states are facing a lot of uncertainty when it comes to federal funding in the new year. And while I don't have a crystal ball, I can talk to you a little bit about what we've seen this year, and kind of what I'm going to be looking at as a reporter as we head into 2026. I mean, the first thing is I think we can expect to see the Trump administration move to freeze or cancel federal grants that that officials don't think align with administration priorities. We saw a ton of that this year. It's a little hard to put a price tag on how much funding the administration withheld, but because there's been a lot of litigation around this that has kind of, ended up releasing some of those funds. But Democrats on the US House Appropriations Committee estimate that as of September, the administration was holding up some $410 billion in previously appropriated funds. And that's for states, cities, nonprofits, farms, you name it. So that's, in the aggregate, that's a lot of money that isn't flowing that entities, including state agencies, were expecting. I think we can also see the potential for more and more damaging government shutdowns. So we just got out of the longest shutdown in US history, but federal funding is set to run out again on January 30th unless Congress passes a spending plan. I mean, with the state of things in Congress, who knows what they're going to do. So I think that's definitely a date worth watching. And this past shutdown was very unusual because we saw the Trump administration be very aggressive in withholding funding from social services in order to put pressure on Congress. Even during the first Trump administration, we didn't see officials move to not release funding for food stamps, heating aid, Head Start, things like that. And I think we can kind of expect to see more of those kind of hardball tactics if there is another shutdown next year. I think I'm also watching for what happens with certain federal agencies. Officials in the Trump administration have said they want to get rid of FEMA, they want to get rid of the Department of Education. How that actually plays out and how that impacts funding streams that states really rely on, I think is very much to be determined. And then last but not least, I'm very interested in seeing how states respond to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act or HR1. As Catherine has outlined, states are kind of, they're already in a tight budget situation and they're going to be facing, some revenue reductions associated with that, pressure potentially to conform with tax cuts that they aren't already conforming with, such as the federal tax break on tipped income. A state's going to say, okay, well, the feds are doing this in our state tax code, we should do this too. If they embrace some of those tax cuts, that's going to be a further revenue loss. And then there are these increasing spending pressures that are under HR1, particularly around Medicaid and SNAP. States also, Medicaid is a huge pressure point for states as they're trying to balance their budgets. In the past, states have been able to turn to provider taxes and raise taxes on entities like hospitals to raise money to help fund Medicaid. The HR1 basically said states can't do that anymore. And there are some states where in future years they'll have to ratchet down the size of certain taxes. So that's something that's definitely going to make it more difficult in some cases for states to balance their Medicaid budgets. So there's a lot to look at and a lot to keep tabs on.
Okay, thank you for that insight. What indicators should state budget offices monitor now to anticipate potential federal cutbacks or funding delays?
That's a great question. I think that a lot of, what is unusual about the current administration is how quickly policy can change. I think what I'm really watching, the news coming out of Washington, what folks on the ground who are reporting there are saying. I think in terms of other indicators, I think certainly if we see serious change in the economy, as at the state level, that can lead the federal government to shift focus. Um, but yeah, it's hard to say. This is kind of an uncertain environment, and it's hard to say if there's anything, any specific data that folks should be keeping an eye on.
Okay, okay. And in your view, how can states prepare for a scenario where federal grants arrive late or reduce significantly? I know being a journalist, you have more of an overview where, down in the states, we're kind of focused on what happens just in our state. But do you have any insight as a journalist that you could share with us?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a tough situation that state agencies find themselves in sometimes. I think that we've seen in the past year a lot of states, including Colorado, where I live, really being proactive in figuring out just what money are we getting from the federal government and what is it funding? Because I know that sometimes federal grants can help fund or partially fund staff positions. Maybe because this money has been kind of flowing in without major interruptions for so long, there are places where states are not totally aware of the risk level. So I think that that's a really good step that states can take if they're not doing it already. And the fiscal policy experts I talk to say, big picture, in any moment of uncertainty, whether it's economic or to do with federal policy, it might be a good opportunity for lawmakers to really take a close look at those rainy day funds. Is this an opportunity to reevaluate how much money do we really need to be spending? Do we need more? Do we need less? Do we need to reevaluate triggers for accessing that money? Is there some kind of federal grant issue that would constitute an economic crisis for us? And I think ultimately state lawmakers are going to be facing some tough decisions about whether or not they backfill some of these grants that have been cancelled. As Catherine mentioned, we're seeing a tightening budget environment. There's less extra money to go around. So I think it's going to be a tough call, but you could think of it as a good thing in some ways because, again, states haven't really had to think about how important this money is to them and to their constituents. So it's an opportunity to sort of really dig into that and make those tough calls.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your response. Now we're going to move to Dr. Larry Ash. Dr. Ash, thank you for joining us today. I think we've got your microphone muted.
How's that?
That's a lot better. Thank you
All
for
right.
joining us.
You betcha. Well, excuse me. I'm going to stay away from making predictions because it's well known that economists have predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. So we usually get it wrong. Uh, but as I look at stuff on the macro level, the long-term environment is not very good. We're running now budget deficits of around 120% of gross national product. That may not mean a lot to many people, but we're approaching banana republic levels of fiscal irresponsibility. And that's going to, well, that may trigger some serious recessionary problems and interest rate hikes in down the road. The fiscal space is increasingly constrained by mandatory and entitlement spending and net interest, leaving less for discretionary room. And the population is aging pretty quickly, which means entitlement spending is going to go up and discretionary spending is going to go, if not down, so isn't going to grow at the rates it has been growing in the past. As just mentioned, the budget environment today is much more fractured than it has been traditionally. We see this brinkmanship, debt ceiling fights, continuing resolution, sequestration, which produce abrupt and across the board effects that make life complicated and difficult for people who are trying to plan for the future or even the short-term future. Typically, states get hit twice during downturns. First, their own tax revenues fall, and secondly, at the same time, the demand for safety net services increase. And that's probably a more likely scenario than the opposite. So what do you do about this? Uncertainty is uncertainty, and managing the environment is a tough thing to try. But there are some things that states can do now that will address some of this. First of all, stress testing budgets for lower federal aid scenarios is a really important thing to do. Identify what you will cut first. Run scenarios where major federal funds are flat or fall, and where interest rates rise, because those are likely scenarios. I was glad to hear that rainy day funds are in good shape, because I think the states are going to need them in the not too distant future. Another is avoid turning federal or surplus receipts into recurring obligations. In other words, don't fund stuff with money that could go away pretty quickly and lead to layoffs and program disruptions that are harmful to people. You know, temporary money's temporary money. Spend it that way. Don't use it to engage in long-term programs. So what's different today? In summary, why is this different than in years past? Well, one of the major factors is the scale of the national debt or deficit, which is bigger than it's ever been before and going in the wrong direction. That is to say, getting bigger and bigger in comparison with gross domestic product. In addition to that, or underlying that in part, is the fact that the population is aging pretty rapidly. I certainly am. And that's going to drive mandatory increases in entitlement spending. And additionally, what we have today is something we've had some in the past, but to a much greater extent today, and that is a fractured political and budget process. And what we saw in November with the partisan divide over a continuing resolution is the kind of chaos that I think we can expect more of in the future. That's not an economist point of view, but that's my own political assessment. So what can states do? Well, the strongest protections are three. One, maintain strong reserve positions. And I think there the states are performing fairly well. Keep budgets flexible, and finally plan for conservatively when making assumptions about the future. That's everything I got today, but I'm sure happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your emphasis on making sure that, states don't rely on one-time funds for reoccurring budget requirements. So I appreciate hearing from all three panelists individually. So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to ask a few questions and ask all three panelists to weigh in. I've got a question or two on my end, but I hope people have been able to submit some questions online that they would like to have answered. If you haven't had a chance to do that yet, please go ahead and submit those now. One question I have for all three panelists is, what is one action that states could take to prepare for federal shifts that may impact states? I know we've talked about it a lot in general, but if anybody has any great examples of something that each state could do, we would appreciate hearing about that.
I could start. I think, and I think Sophie already alluded a little to this in her remarks, as did Dr. Ash. I think to the extent that states can, if they haven't already done so, and really we have seen a lot of action by states in recent years to get a more holistic picture of the federal funds flowing to the state, and what employees are tied to those, what employees are either fully or partially federally funded. Basically just getting more centralized data around federal funds going to your state, and having that at the ready should additional actions at the federal level impact those programs. We've seen, we saw during the pandemic era, with the influx of federal funds that states experienced, we saw a lot of activity around standing up, federal grants management offices that are, again, more centralized. And so that is one action. We don't necessarily at NASBO recommend specific actions, but that's one approach that we have seen states take to prepare for accepting federal funds, but now in this environment also having a handle on the risks of and implications of these federal funds from various streams. Just having more centralized data is one approach that states are taking to prepare, and also having staff that are assigned to really look at the whole picture of federal funds across the state. We're seeing more states adopt positions like that.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Sophie, Dr. Ash, did you have anything else that y'all would like to add?
Well, I just reiterate my pessimism about the economic future, and also say that I don't sense, at least in my state, Arkansas, any appreciation of what that might look like down the road. I mean, the governor's still talking about lowering the individual income tax rates. There's no discussion of beefing up rainy day funds. I mean, in this state, if you listen to the political conversation in Little Rock and otherwise, is pretty much oblivious to the fact that the status quo that's prevailed in the last 10, 15 years is over. And that as long as we got a very disruptive federal administration with way different priorities than we've seen in previous administrations, that the new environment is going to be a lot tougher to navigate. And I don't see anybody recognizing that and really thinking about it. But if they were to ask me what to do, I'd say, look, in planning through the future, go on the worst case assumptions and build your rainy day funds, because I think you're going to need them.
Okay. Thank you.
I would just say, I think Dr. Ash's point about stress testing budgets for various scenarios if federal funding were to go away is a great idea for states. Um, and I also think, oh gosh, what was I going to add to that? Yeah, I also would second his point about demographic change, because I think we're kind of at a moment where I think the youngest boomers start to turn 65 in like 2030. I mean, it's like we're really moving quickly to a point where we're going to have a lot of people who are retired and are increasingly in need of services like long-term care. I mean, I know that state budgets don't, in a lot of states, analysts don't typically look very far ahead, but I think in states where there is a team that takes a longer term view, especially looking at that demographic shift and those pressures, can also really illuminate some of the challenges that states are going to be facing down the road.
Okay.
And
Thank
if
you.
I could just add one more
Mhm.
thing, I think we need to spend a little more time thinking about the possibility of black swan events. And black swan events are things that come out of the blue, like COVID. If I were to predict a black swan event now or two, I'd say a war with Venezuela, which could be another Iraq. I'd say serious problem with China trying to take a stab at grabbing up Taiwan. These are things that change the whole environment very quickly, very dramatically, and very significantly. They come out of nowhere, and like COVID, and there's not a hell of a lot you can do to specifically prepare for them. But it's something that we need to be thinking about, that we don't know what they'll be, but we know that there are going to be a lot of black swan events. And I'm not sure what you do about that, but I suggest that it be more top of mind than it currently is.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I know Catherine did a good job in her slide deck of showing us, she would show us national trends and show us trends from the CSG South states. Are there any other examples y'all can provide or have, knowledge of that the South might be doing better compared to the nation, or any examples where the South might could improve as far as their budget, impacts?
Yes, I would reiterate what my slides show, that, and I know others have also pointed to the rainy day fund data and the importance of rainy day funds. That's an area where the South is doing very well. If you look at the data, with all states in the region having a rainy day fund of at least 5% as a percentage of general fund spending, with many above that, well above that. And we don't, at NASBA, we don't have a recommendation of a certain level. That's a question we get asked a lot, but it really does depend on, state-specific circumstances. To Sophie's point about stress testing, states, an increasing number of states use stress testing to help inform the target size of their rainy day fund, by looking at how volatile their revenues are, and what different economic scenarios how those are, modeling those out to see what impacts on revenues look like. And then, as Dr. Ash pointed out in his remarks, a recession scenario, for example, not only impacts the revenue side, but also increases spending needs for safety net programs, et cetera. And so there are stress testing approaches that some states use that take both of those into account in terms of determining what their rainy day fund size, their target size is. But I also want to, since we are talking a lot about federal impacts and federal changes to federal funds that will be ongoing. I can't stress enough how rainy day funds, while an important tool, these are one-time resources. So to the points that my co-panelists have made, they are not going to be a solution to ongoing reductions. But they can be an important tool in this environment to help mitigate impacts during transitions, but especially are there for responding to economic disruptions and a potential downturn. So,
Do you know if we saw any states dipping into their rainy day funds during this last government shutdown?
So we got some questions on that, and to be honest, I don't recall if there were any specific examples. It was not a widespread, certainly not something that was used widespread, and if it was at all used, it was pretty limited. But generally speaking, no, we did not see states turn to the rainy day funds to temporarily backfill federal funds that were shut off due to the shutdown. There were some other fund sources that some states were looking at, but generally they are restricted in how they can be used and often require typically require full legislative approval to tap, as well as can only be done under certain circumstances. So there are a lot of restrictions in place.
Okay, thank you. Sophie, Dr. Ash, did you have anything else you would like to add?
For me?
Yes, Dr. Ash, thank you.
No, nothing.
Okay.
On South specific impacts, I did a little thinking about the impact of HR1 on southern states, and I think there are a lot of states in the South that are set to see, maybe a smaller impact from those changes because I think only 8 of 15 CSG South states have expanded Medicaid. A lot of the Medicaid cuts were really focused on, reducing federal spending on that Medicaid expansion group. So that is going to have less of an impact in those states. And I don't think there are any states in the South that automatically adopted the income tax cuts in HR1. And then states were kind of all over the place in how closely they conformed with the corporate income tax cuts. There are only about 7 states that conformed with everything and are going to adopt all of those tax cuts into their tax codes. Colorado is one of them, and it's going to be a serious fiscal hit for the state, at least for the next 2 years, which is when the corporate tax cut is greatest. So from that perspective, I think there are certainly some states that are hit a little harder from the changes in HR1 than some southern states. I mean, the sort of main pressure to watch in the South, other than the growing cost of Medicaid, which is sort of an issue everywhere, is kind of how various income tax cuts that states enacted back in the pandemic era when there was tons of money to spend, how that kind of plays out as we enter a tighter budget environment or a recession. And as Catherine's slide showed, states have done a pretty good job of sort of anticipating where revenues are going to go and budgeting conservatively. But anytime there's a major change in tax policy, it can kind of take a while or a few years to really get a better sense of how that's going to impact tax collections. So I think that's something worth watching. In the southern states specifically.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that's all the questions we have from the chat, and unless there's any other questions received in the chat, I think we'll kind of start wrapping things up. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their insights, and thank you all of our attendees for joining today. As we mentioned before, you'll receive a follow-up email with this recording link, the slides, and any resources from today's session. And we're looking forward to having additional sales sessions the rest of the year. So I'm going to turn this over to Jaslyn to give us some more information on that.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. All righty. I'm going to try to go to full screen here, but maybe we can't. So I'll just back it up a little. So we have, everybody can see the schedule here. For our Q1 webinars for sale, we're excited to announce the next 3 webinars coming up on our schedule. For January 9th, the topic will be defending state systems against emerging cyber threats. For February, we'll be diving into AI and emergency tech through legal risk and mitigations. March the 13th, we'll have a session on communicating with the public in a polarized environment. And then we also have our policy webinars coming up. We have in January on the 16th, Fiscal Well-Being of the South, a fiscal health update on Southern states. February the 20th, we'll have AI and emerging tech, legal risks for mitigation. Actually, that may be a typo there. I'll fix that. I'll get you the updated one. And then for March the 20th, we have policy at the pace of innovation, AI in Southern states and healthcare. Like we said, I will send these to you in our post-event survey. And then that third one will be updated for you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jaslyn. And thank you again to everybody that participated. Be sure to check for your email, and we look forward to seeing everyone again in January. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.